Good evening and welcome to another Omega Insight. Happy Memorial Day. Today is the day that we spend some time remembering the fallen who've given their lives to service. So, to those of you who've experienced a loss in your family, um, my deepest gratitude for their service and my condolences as well. I know that Memorial Day is often the launch of summer and everyone does their picnics and whatnot, but I always like to take a moment to remember the idea of the point of Memorial Day is to honor the fallen. So, tonight's topic is about silence. So, last week I talked a little bit about introspection and today with Memorial Day, the idea of contemplating and remembering things that draws me to the topic of silence. I'm very familiar with silence. It's been a part of my life as far back as I can remember. One of the punishments my mom used to do would be the silent treatment, and I'm sure there's other people who've had this experience as well. It's one of the punishments. It's a way that we inflict harm on people. But my mom's silent treatment went a little bit further than just not speaking. I mean, she just refused to acknowledge my sheer existence. And it would go on time for sometimes for weeks where she'd pretend I didn't exist. I even had the punishment of my spot, which I've spoken about before. It was in the living room. I had to sit down next to the living room table, and not only did my mom not talk to me, but she instructed my siblings no one was allowed to speak to me. That was my punishment. So I would sit facing the TV, and most of the time it was turned off, especially during the day. And my food would be served to me on the dining room table, the living room table, so I'd just turn and eat and then turn back, and everyone was instructed to ignore me. So again, that's the idea of a negative aspect of silence. But it's been a part of silence that I've had. And as tragic as that may seem, I had tremendous benefit from experiencing those moments of silence. I would spend hours motionless. Well, get up to go to the bathroom and whatnot, but I would sit there motionless. And unbeknownst to me, it was a way of practicing mindfulness and meditation. I did not know that. Nobody instructed me on it, but that's what I came to, was I would just sit. The Desiderata poem was up on the wall up in the corner, so I would sit and read that and try to memorize as much as I could, even though many of the words were beyond my comprehension. But I developed this attunement of listening. Like, I became really familiar with recognizing the distinction of footsteps, who was going up and down the stairs. I could tell just by their footsteps. I could hear the people outside, the kids playing outside, cars in the street. Like, I really practiced my awareness levels from being in that spot. So I don't take that as an offense. I really, when I think about it, I learned how to control my thinking. And I didn't even know. So that's a whole new subject, a whole nother subject that I don't want to get into. But that's an aspect of silence. So silence has positive and negatives. When we use the silence for our own benefit, that's positive, obviously. When we fill our world in the intention of causing silence to another individual, that's negative. So we have to be mindful of the way we use our silence. Silence is so beneficial, it really is. When I lost my hearing in my right ear, it didn't just go away, it replaced itself with static noise. So I have constant static white noise in my right ear, constantly. It never stops, never stops. That was an adjustment for me, because when I would go into a silent state, all of a sudden I've got this kind of sound happening. And I'm grateful that in my earlier years I learned how to tune things out, so I've become accustomed to tuning that out and not hearing it. It really is only the times that I put my attention on it that I hear it. So back to the idea of silence and the benefit of silence. Naturally, I'm going to say, with silence comes meditation. We all can practice meditation in the silence, although some of us have been taught how to meditate when there's a lot of calamity about, and that's because, again, it's the idea of controlling our thinking. So when I've had both negative and positive experiences of silence, we grow to appreciate the actual concept of silence. If we think about nature, that quandary, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody around, does it make a sound? That idea of thinking that. But nature is often not silent. However, it's very beneficial for us. It's a different type of silence. There's the crickets and the birds and the wind. So if we listen to the different sounds of silence, or the different sounds that we perceive silence to be, we recognize that there's many sounds occurring. Truly, the only silence that we can have is if we go in a soundproof room. And even then we don't have silence, because we can still hear our heart or our breathing if we really attune ourselves. But that doesn't discount the value of silence. I love being out in nature because it's a different type of silence. It's not speaking, it's being internal, being introspective, which is what we talked about last Monday. In the silent moments, that's when we discover truths. That's when we discover awarenesses. When we take those pragmatic pauses in those silent moments, we actually discover direction. We find what the things that we're looking for. If you've ever had that panic, you lose your keys and you're, oh, where are the keys? Where are the keys? And studies have indicated if we divert our attention away, typically when we're not thinking about it, it will come to us. The answer will come to us. And this is something that has been passed on for generations. Edison talked about that. Einstein talked about that. When they're working on a problem, they would just put it off to the side and work on something else, and before you know it, the solution would come to them, and then they could go back and continue on with their work. So those pauses are so beautiful, and I know I've talked about fragmented pauses before. I want to just talk about the idea of celebrating silence as a choice. Many years ago, as a discipline, there were several of us in the Omega environment that we would have a silent Sunday. Starting from 7 o'clock in the morning until 7 o'clock at night, we would not speak. It was very helpful for me. I lived by myself. However, we would not speak. And what I became aware of is many times when I was alone, I would talk out loud. I still talk out loud. It's my way of processing through things. But on those silent Sundays, we wouldn't speak. And that was very refreshing, I could say. I'm a very big fan of nonverbal meditative retreats to go to. Vipassana, I've mentioned that in the past, where it's meditation and it's nonverbal. You're not speaking for, I did it for 10 days. So there was no speaking for 10 days on my part. The instructors naturally spoke, but for me not to speak up. By not speaking, it really does put us in a place of contemplation, and I find it to be very peaceful. There are some people who struggle with silence. They have to fill the void. And most of the time this is because we don't want to be thinking of the things that are stressing us out and divert our attention. Fill it with noise so I don't have to process what is happening. But I think silence is so important. And in today's world, where we have so many distractions, our children are not learning to be silent. There's few pockets of individuals who have started implementing mindfulness in the educational system. Goldie Hawn has a great nonprofit that she started, and Mindful, I think it's called, I don't remember, but she's teaching younger children how to be mindful, how to meditate, how to bring their attention to their breath, and controlling their thinking and controlling their emotions. I think that's great. I think it's wonderful that there are pockets. There's schools. I know there's a school in Brooklyn that's really big on being mindful, and every day everyone sits down in a circle, they talk about how they're feeling for the day, they practice meditation, they practice breathing, they work through problems. Instead of getting upset and angry, they work through conflicts very calmly. There's the talking stick idea that if you have the stick, you're the only one who's allowed to speak. So there's many different ways that we can start implementing silence in our lives. Again, with the busyness of our work environment and the busyness of life in general, sometimes it's hard to just take those moments and create a moment of silence. I love waking up early in the morning. I'm up between 4:30, sometimes 5. And that's when the planet is just waking up. And sometimes I love to just go sit outside with my cup of tea and watch the sunrise and hear the birds waking up. And there's just something nice about being quiet and reverent. I think that's the word that comes to my mind. When we consciously choose silence, we are putting ourselves in a reverent mode where we discover peace and gratitude. We can focus on so much of the negative that's happening in the world. We are negative creatures, or we can just focus on the gratitude, and that gratitude shows up in those moments of silence as well. So that I wanted to mention that today, especially with Memorial Day being reverent and remembrance. It's those silent moments when we find that gratitude and the passion that we're seeking. And the calm and peace is often found in silence as well. So thank you for letting me discuss silence today. I hope that you have moments of silence this week that you find beneficial, and I look forward to seeing you next week. As always, thank you for keeping the spirit of Omega alive. Bye now.